YouTube, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. Today, guys, it is end of the month tier list, and our tier list is composed of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, rogue, experimental, and below rogue. Now, honestly, I don't know what other name that I'm gonna place below rogue, so I'm just gonna place it below rogue. Okay, so yes, an experimental are decks that needs a little bit more support. They have some potential in being a really good deck, but they need more testing. So, first and foremost, for our first deck, we have here Branded. Now, Branded, in my own opinion, is a really good tier 3 deck. Hasn't changed a lot for the couple of months now. The grind game for Branded hasn't changed, and they're a pretty good deck to run in the meta, especially against WILL. It really depends on the cards that they are dealt with or the cards that you have drawn for Branded. But other than that, as long as you know how to play Branded, you are pretty much sorted out for the whole rank. Then we have the new archetype, which is Centurion. Now, Centurion, in my own opinion, is practically experimental. I do believe that this deck needs a little bit more support to make this way better. Ever Calamity was still here. This would be a really good tier 3 deck. But for now, in my own opinion, it's just basically experimental. Or if you want to place it in the tier list, it is practically rogue. But for me, it needs a little bit more support. You can't actually make a really good board. The ceiling is not that high for this deck. If you have the right cards, you can just make 1 or 2 monsters on the field. The bright side for this deck is it is not prone to Nibiru. That's a little bit better, and Ash Blossom is not really a threat for this deck at all. But yeah, there are a couple of archetypes that you can add with the Centurions to make this a way better deck. Like the RDA, you have also Sword Soul. Also, Horus is another good thing as well. But yeah, experimental in my own opinion. Maybe in the near future we'll have new supports. I heard that Rage of the Abyss has Centurion supports, but I'm pretty sure that it's not really mostly used on Centurion. But anyways, that is Centurions. For our next archetype, we have here Fire King. So this is pure Fire Kings, by the way. I'm just gonna place Fire King Snake Eyes as tier 1. I think everybody knows about this. So this is basically a tier 1 deck. This is Fire King Snake Eyes, by the way, guys. Not just Snake Eyes. If pure Snake Eyes, it is tier 3. Pure Fire King is tier 3 as well. So maybe in the near future for Fire Kings, we'll have some of them in the ban list. But as of now, they're pretty strong as a tier 3 deck alongside Branded. But I think Branded is much more higher than the pure Fire Kings and Snake Eyes. They're a pretty good deck, to be honest. Next, we have Dinos. Dinos, in my own opinion, are pretty good at this format, having to go up against WILL. But I think they are still basically like lower rogue at this point. There are some scenarios where Dinos are gonna struggle for quite a bit, but as of the meta nowadays with WILL running in rank, I think Ultimate Conductor Tyrano is one of those outs that you can do with WILL, if ever that will be the case. Luandery's really good rogue deck as well. This is one of the decks that can handle Shifter, evenly match Dimensional Fissure, and still play a really good game with it. It is not also prone to Max C. The only downside for Luandery's is its ability to brick, and that is very understandable because of a ton of cards that they have in their arsenal that are semi-limited, limited, or even banned. But it's still a really good counter for the meta nowadays. Heroes are still pretty good as well. It really depends on the pilot that's using this, because not all hero players really know how to use a deck. Higher ranked heroes are much more knowledgeable with their deck and how they actually work. I think going second for a hero deck is kind of scary in some cases. They can just OTK if they have a chance. Chimeras are the same as well with heroes. I'm gonna put Chimeras here. Ceiling is not that high with Chimeras. I think they're average, but at least you have one targeted negate and untargeted negate, and card advantage is going to be beneficial for you. And then we have Exorcisters. I'm going to put Exorcisters here before Dinos. Exorcisters are kind of good as one of the decks that can use Shifter. The only downside for this is mid to late game, it's going to be hard for Exorcisters having to compete against the meta or even non-meta decks. There are no cards in their arsenal that can bring back cards from their graveyard or from the banished pile back to their deck or back to their hand. So it's kind of hard for this type of deck to actually work. But even so, they are very powerful enough to do an OTK if ever they are able. If ever you know how this deck really works and you are capable enough in piloting an Exorcister deck. But even so, they are pretty much rogue. Dynamorpheus, current meta nowadays. Dynamorpheus is kind of good and all, but against the meta, especially against WILL. But if ever you're going first, I think you have a really good win condition at this point. So basically, I'm just gonna put them on rogue. But you know what? Maybe I'm just being too generous with this. Maybe I'm gonna put them on below rogue. But regardless, I'm just gonna put them there. Labyrinth, basically tier 2. I do believe Labyrinth is pretty good at this point on. I do hate trap decks in general, but Labyrinth is an exception. I had a ton of fun with them during the Exit Cup, and I know people really hate the Exit Cup. They are very, like, I would say well-rounded. They are not really susceptible to Maxi, Nibiru, or even, well, they can be susceptible to Evailer and Imperm, but it's not really like a big issue because you're basically running trap cards at this point on. Also, you have the Furniture Labyrinth to get a hold of your trap cards. Lady Labyrinth will get a trap card that you basically need to counter a specified deck. They're pretty well-rounded, I would say, for a trap deck. And that's one of its strengths, to be honest. Kashtiras, typically tier 3. I think people are just using this as a stun variant, which is, they're pretty good though against the meta. Face up a Rise Art, you have also Macrocosmos. People are running Fissure, so it's basically a stun or floodgate deck at this point on, but they're pretty good. A single Kashtira on the field is kind of formidable, I would say. They are pretty much as a tier 3 deck. Problem with this, they don't really have like good negates or protection after which. So if ever they get Zeused, so that's really a big issue for them. Vanadium, really good rogue deck at this point. I would say they're much higher in the ceiling for than Dinomorpheus. Horus, I did believe that Horus before, I did place them as below rogue, was it? Or I placed them as rogue. I forgot. But they are pretty much experimental in relation to some of my games against Horus decks. It really depends on the deck that they are placed with. So I'm going to put them as experimental. People are running this on stun or as just an engine to most of the decks that we have now. Infernoble, they're practically below rogue at this point. But if for an exception, if you place Mikanko with it, I think they're higher than rogue, so they're practically like tier 3. If you pair this with Mikankos, I think it is a really solid tier 3 deck in my own opinion. We have the new Magic Spectre deck. It's kind of hard for this deck. I don't want to be like half-cocked and putting this into below rogue or rogue. There are some decks out there that can benefit widely with the new Magic Spectre cards, especially when Kirin is back on 3 copies for Master Duel. Mathmex, really solid tier 3 deck. I think they're higher than the usual. If you know how to play this deck, then pretty good. Memento, they're below rogue at this point. Honestly, guys, Memento will have their spotlight back into the meta once they got the supports from the Infinite Forbiddens. But for now, they're below rogue in my own opinion. Salamangreats, basically rogue at this point. Maybe higher than Heroes, I would say. Or Salamangreat. There we go. Higher than Heroes. They're pretty good though. Ceiling is not that high. Grind game isn't that crazy as well. But when it comes to resources, I think Salamangreat takes the cake with this one. They're pretty strong mid to long game. Salamangreat is gonna win in the battle of attrition. Runic, they're below rogue. You can place this one on experimental though. There are some decks that can benefit from Runic, but as of now, they're practically below rogue. Randall Magicians, easy enough as a really good tier 3 deck. The new supports from the new Zark cards made this a little bit more consistent. Really good tier 3 deck in my own opinion. I know how this deck really works now, so that's why I'm confident enough to place them on tier 3. Rescue Ace, I'm gonna place them on higher tier 2 next to Labyrinth. I think this is one of the strongest tier 2 deck. I think Lifter on 2 wasn't that significant at all. Crazy enough, I mean, you can just get a hold of that with a copy of Emergency and a copy of Hydrant. 2 copies of Lifter isn't really a big issue. Resonators, they're still pretty good for a ceiling. It's not really that crazy, but they can still be formidable and all if ever they have the chance to go for an OTK. Pureleys, I'm gonna place them on tier 3. Pureleys are still pretty good though. The 2 copies of Lily and the 2 copies of Purely wasn't that crazy of a ban. At least they are still playable. Naturias, I'm pretty sure they're practically experimental. In my own experience with Naturias, it's much better if you pair them with another archetype to make this deck work. If ever you're gonna pair them with Horus, they're pretty good as rogue. If you're gonna pair them with Runic, they're practically rogue as well. It's basically experimental. I'm just gonna put them at experimental. Rikas, really good rogue deck, maybe around these parts here. Yes, I think that's understandable. So yeah, ceiling is quite high for this deck. Grind game is really good as well. Prone to Maxi, prone to Nibiru. If you know how to play this deck, you can recover from that. But still, rogue deck. Punks, best version for Punks is basically Punks itself. They're still one of the strongest psychic decks out there, but they're still practically rogue. If you pair it with Gold Bride, just basically don't run it. Although Gold Bride is one of the suitable decks that can play with Punks, so far it's much better if you play pure Punks without the Gold Bride. Bird, I wanted to be honest with you guys with regards to Bird, that it needs a little bit more experimentation. I've seen some gameplays out there. They're not really like that formidable, I would say. I think more experimentation makes this deck a little bit better. But for me, it's just basically experimental. If you place this on the tier list, I think it's below Rogue at this point. Some decks needs some good support. So just gonna place them on experimental. Sky Strikers, really good rogue deck, I would say. So it's kind of close to Chimeras. I think the third copy of Kagari and the third copy of Engage makes this deck good. They're actually doing better in the current rank nowadays. For me, it's just basically rogue. Super heavy, they're practically rogue. They can't use Colbert Grave, Cross-out Designators, Imperm. That's one of the significant cards that can counter a Maxi and Ash Blossom, which is, they are very susceptible to those kind of cards as well. Sword Soul, they're pretty good, I would say. They're back to rogue in my own opinion. Yeah, I think that's understandable. Higher than Floundries, but yeah, practically rogue. If you have Protoss on the field, you can counter some of the dark decks at this point, especially if you're going up against Branded, Labyrinth, or even Bell. Ceiling is not that high, board is not that great. A maximum of Battle of the Floor, a copy of Protoss, and a copy of Shisha on the field, with or without the Blackout on the back row. Even so, I'm just gonna put them in rogue. Tier Elements, really good tier 3 deck. I think they're higher at this point on, maybe on tier 3 alongside Branded. A really good fusion deck in my own opinion. With or without the Horus engine added into it, they're still pretty good. They're still pretty strong. I've seen a lot of versions for tier elements where people are running this with Horus. Both of them are still equal at its own grind game. Still pretty good though. Very scary at some point if they can pop off. But yeah, really good tier 3 deck. Trap checks, rogue, basically, I think I'm just gonna put them here. I think that's basically understandable. Scareclaw, rogue as well. Sprites are kind of good nowadays, but needs more experimentation. I'm gonna place them here. If ever I'm gonna put this on the tier, they're practically rogue. I have hopes that Sprite is gonna be good in the near future. Yubel, basically tier 1. Why didn't I just place this at the beginning of the tier list? They are tier 1 alongside Parking Snake Eyes deck. Unchained, I'm just gonna put them on rogue. I've seen some other crazy variants for Unchained. If you have any idea on what other variant for Unchained, unless you place them with Yubel, I think that would be higher for tier list. But Unchained in general is just basically rogue. But tell me in the comment section below if there are another variant for Unchained. Valmonica's practically rogue. Valmonicas are crazy enough. I'm gonna place them here. So Valmonicas are kind of good if you know how this deck really works. It's easy enough. It's very cheap for a deck. But the only problem with Valmonicas, if you remove the Pendulum cards that has counters, you're basically dead on the board. Resources also might deplete from time to time. So it's gonna be hard for Valmonicas to actually play through mid to late game. But if you can solidify the game on the first, second turn, you're good. Watts, they use supports from the Eternal Partners. I don't think that they need more experimentation. Watts are Watts. But there are some level 2s that would be somewhat beneficial to Sprites though. Maybe I'm gonna put them on experimental. But so far, no, I'm just gonna put them on below rogue. Maybe there's another version out there that can benefit for Watt. The only thing that I've seen online, or the gameplay that I've seen online, are for Sprites. So I'm just gonna put them as below rogue. Vanquished Soul, I would say they're pretty good as tier 3 decks, maybe close to or between Pendulum Magicians and Kashtiras. They are one of the decks that can actually use Shifter, which is a very strong card. But yeah, that's tier 3. And then lastly, we have here is Tri Brigade, which is at its own, it's practically below rogue, but if you pair it with Sprites, oh yeah, Fire Kings is another good variant for this. I played Fire Kings with Tri Brigade, but if you play it with Pure, it's basically below rogue. That is our tier list for today, guys. If you have any comments with regards to the tier list, comment down below. And if I missed anything, please tell me in the comment section below. That's it for today, guys. Keep safe, good luck. If you like this kind of content, like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.